Welcome to The Good Word. My name is Vincent Goodwill, senior NBA reporter for Yahoo Sports and the host of this show. Today, we are joined by a very, very special guest. She is one of my favorite people in the world, and even more so than that, she is my absolute favorite writer doing it. She has a new book coming out. It's actually just out. I'm halfway through it. We are joined today by Mirin Fader, senior staff writer of The Ringer and New York Times best-selling author of her first book, or one of her first books, Giannis, The Impossible Rise of an NBA Champion. Your book recently, that came out last Tuesday, Dream, The Life and Legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon, just came out. How you doing, Mirin?
Oh my God, I'm literally your biggest fan, so I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mirin, you guys, is like, if you guys aren't reading her all the time, like, she legit is like the best among us. I'm not saying that. There's like a group of favorite writers that I have. There's like 4 of them. And she is like at the top of the mountain. Like Marcus Thompson is one, I call him bars. Like Jonathan Abrams is another. Like there's a couple others, man. But Mirin is like the best among us. And Mirin, I'm just curious as we dive into like everything with the book, which will be, I'm sure, another New York Times bestseller. What made you dive into the project of Hakeem Olajuwon, who's kind of been almost a private figure? Was that the thing that you wanted to kind of flesh out everything from his career, from his life before he got to the States? Like, what was the thing that was curious about you that sparked all of this?
I just feel like he's this underrated, player and person who gave so much to the game, changed so much about basketball, like positionless basketball, everything we see today, the influx of international superstars, it really traces back to him, but he's never given credit for it. He's left off of lists. Younger generations don't know who he is as much. And I just felt like there was so much synergy between the first book. I kind of look at this as like the prequel to Giannis. So it's like, who paved the way for Giannis, Joel Embiid, all of these people? It all goes back to Dream. So I just thought his story was so rich and so worthy of a book-long treatment.
Yeah, it was. I'm like halfway through it. And I'm almost to the point. I'm right at the point of the start of the 93-94 season, which is the first Houston Rockets championship season.
Mm.
But there's so much richness leading up to it, from his life in Lagos and everybody focusing on like the soccer and, how, adept he was at soccer. And I was like, it seems like the handball stuff was the thing that really drove like the hand-eye coordination and everything. Like there's just so many great details that I've gathered that I just didn't know about him. But I'm very curious. Were you surprised, Mirin? Because I will tell you what jumped out to me as I started reading this.
Okay.
When he first, and not skipping over growing up in Lagos and everything, because that's so fascinating, but just for the purpose of just this part of the discussion, the racism when he got to Houston, like the way that people were talking to him and treating him as if he was like some circus animal, and they thought that, people in Houston or people in Africa, like Africa was a country and a city as opposed to, the largest freaking continent that we got out here. Like it just felt so wild to take us back to the 1980s where the racism was in print, and it was so wild that struck you the way that it struck me.
It did. And honestly, that's part of why I think biographies are so important, because they're not just about stats. They're not just about what somebody accomplishes. It's about perception. And I think his story has been so flattened over time, portrayed as this dreamlike fairy tale thing. Oh, he gets to Houston. They become this amazing team. Phi Slamma Jamma. Boom, he's in the NBA, 2 championships. And it's like, people were incredibly racist towards him. I mean, these headlines, I've read every article that's ever been written on him. You are thinking, surely this could not have been written. But of course, because he doesn't just come to America, he comes to the Deep South. And I thought it was really important to show that context and show how he's perceived. I mean, that was an all-black team. There were signs at a game in 1982 that said "Cage the Cougars." That's the era that Hakeem Olajuwon is playing in.
The way that, and we're thinking about media as like this sophisticated thing. Like now we're thinking about, nobody would show up to a game asking a foreign player or a non-American basketball player the type of questions that he was asked. And I felt it was interesting or fascinating the way that he played around with the media. Like it showed even for the ways
Right.
that he was a novice to quote unquote American life, growing up growing up where he grew up, Houston was not some huge big place to him, but it was treated like it was this huge big place to him. Like he came in with a certain amount of worldliness that people didn't give him credit for. And I found that really, really fascinating. Did you find that part fascinating?
I did. These reporters would just ask him these ridiculous questions. They would say, "Did you come from the quote jungle?"
Yeah.
And he had to constantly say to them, "I come from a normal big city, just like you. English is literally the national language of Nigeria. My parents went to college." He was so astounded at the ignorance of Americans and the ignorance of, his new classmates who had never seen anyone from Africa. They just knew nothing. I think one of the great revelations of this book that I was able to find was actually an editorial that Hakeem himself wrote in 1982 for the student newspaper, the Daily Cougar. And in it, he describes how awful it feels that people don't understand where he comes from, and they think he's quote dumb, and they think he quote comes from the jungle. And he's like, you guys don't understand me. You don't understand my life, my journey. People think I'm not smart. It's not true. And I just think it was such a powerful moment. You never see those type of first person narratives. And it also just shows, it's even more miraculous, I think, what he was able to achieve and accomplish while being this, exoticized othered gaze in front of
Yes.
all of these people for years. And nobody ever talks about that.
It's amazing that happened in 1982 and 83. And then all
Right.
these years later, we're talking about geese and cats and
I know.
dogs and like we haven't, like, stuff hasn't changed
I'm done.
that much. Like if you know, like stuff hasn't changed. The rhetoric, the accepted rhetoric hasn't changed that much. And we're supposed to be a sophisticated society. That being said, go ahead. No, go ahead. You got thoughts. Go ahead. Come on.
So like later in the book, there's a chapter about sneakers, and it's about, marketability. And Hakeem wins his second title. It's 1995. He's on top of the basketball world. He cannot play any better than he does. I mean, he's just unreal. He's destroying people every night, like the best of the best in the NBA. New York Times writes a story talking about why is he so successful, but major endorsements elude him? And there's all these dog whistles throughout the article. They say that advertisers, quote, prefer an American guy, or his last name is, quote, too difficult to pronounce. And I'm reading this, and as somebody that worked on the Giannis book, I'm like, this could be written right now. This is written right now about Giannis. This is the same thing about his last name, same thing about marketability or attention given or not given. And, it's just astounding how very, so, unadvanced as a society we are. It's terrible.
No, one of the things that I found fascinating, because I remember having like basketball cards back in the day. I don't know, like maybe I'm dating myself. Like I'm a little bit older, maybe than most of the sophisticated audience. But I remember having like the Topps basketball cards or the NBA Hoops basketball cards. And the Hakeem Olajuwon basketball card had the name Hakeem on it, like coming to America, Hakeem. And I was trying to figure out, when did the change happen? Like, how did he go from being Hakeem to Hakeem? And reading that element in the book where basically he just was so respectful, even about his own name being used in the wrong way. I just thought that spoke so much to a level of his own like humility and respect, and trying to read the room and not trying to sort of take up space in that realm, while he was taking up all the space in the paint, swatting your shit out of bounds, taking it back. Like I felt like though he was two different people. Did you sense the dichotomy of the player on the floor versus, even before he re-embraced everything with the Islam, excuse me, before he embraced everything with that, because there was the element of before he was embracing Islam and everything else in Houston, it just seemed like those were two different guys.
It's a really good way to put it. It's very interesting. Like he was very meek at first off the court, very, very shy. Absolutely. And that comes from growing up and being ashamed of being so tall. You know, he was bullied. He was called all these things. He would isolate and cry, and you know, he would slouch in doorways. And so I think like growing up, he had that kind of, you know, wanting to hide and not take up space and being awkward. And when he gets to Houston, you know, the secretary I discovered at the time in the basketball office, she mistakenly writes his name down with an A instead of an H. So it's always been H. But he, you know, according to all the teammates that I interviewed, you know, he was so polite and was taught, you know, by his parents to always respect elders, you know, don't correct elders, like always be respectful, that he just sort of let it go. And, you know, back then they had, instead of the last name, they had Hakeem on the back of the jersey. Like those Five Slam Jalen jerseys were so cool that it had the first name, and it just stuck. But it was really cool because I got to interview a female reporter at the time, one of the only ones, with shout out to her. And she just walked up to him and interviewed him, and she asked him to write his name, and he wrote it with an H. And she goes back to her superiors and they're like, you know, stupid, you know, woman sports writer, you don't know what's up. And she was like, no, his name is literally with an H, but the story never came out. And she's vindicated all these years later. But on the court, I think that was a refuge. I think taking up space for the first time in his life, he was celebrated for his height, right? It was seen as a gift. It was seen as something powerful. You could contribute. You could really do something with basketball. Like you alluded to, he was a late bloomer. He loved handball. Even when he started playing basketball at age 17, he was still playing handball. He had to be hauled across the field from the handball court to the basketball court mid-game so he wouldn't miss the other sports game. So I just think the time period we're talking about is so fascinating because he's like en route, you know? He's not the dream shake. He's not the offensive player we see later, but he's like on his way, and you can see how he's becoming comfortable in his own skin.
It's amazing that and there's two things I want to touch on that you just said, like really fascinating. But while this is top of my head, and I thought about this morning, maybe like an hour or so ago, maybe it was last night when I was reading it. He's the one transitional center that sort of connects everybody with the exception of Chamberlain and Russell, right? He played against the Jabbar. He played against, you know, back end prime Jabbar and the Ralph Sampsons and all those guys. Then he played against the Duncans on, you know, toward the back end of his career, and Shaq and David Robinson, all those guys. And he fit in athletically both ways. Like, does it just seem like you talked about him almost getting lost to history, but he connects history. And I just think that it's wild that we don't look at him and center him in that way that he connects history, because he's so connected to all of these guys.
Right. Like, and you would think he would be more, because sports media, like, we love to say, oh, who would survive in this era? Who wouldn't? And he's like the rare person that would survive. And not only that, but like kill. And I think like, if you look at like the shake and why it is so timeless and why it was effective in all these different eras of basketball, is because he did it out of necessity, right? Like, he wasn't 7 feet tall, although they erroneously claim that, but he is 6'10" and a half. And, you know, they were taller than him, and so he had to be quicker. So he does it out of necessity. Like, really, you know, he's known for his incredible, you know, shot blocking, defense, rebounding, all these things. But what really makes him timeless throughout all these eras is the IQ. He was smarter than everyone. He'd outcreate you. He'd just do things that were court vision. That's just, you can't teach that. And so, you know, I think it was so funny, like looking back at that 86 series with the Rockets and the Lakers, you know, Kareem is still putting up 30 points, but there's this one practice in the book where Pat Riley's just looking at him and they're looking at each other like, I don't know what to do about Dream. Like, he's really that guy. I don't know what to do.
No. And I think it's important to remember, for people who don't know, in the context of 1986, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is widely thought of as the greatest basketball player to have ever lived. And he's putting up 30-point games, and the Lakers are the defending champs, and you got Prime Magic, Prime Worthy, all these guys. And he's saying that this second-year center, like, it's important to put Hakeem in the context of second-year center, giving him the blues, and they won four straight in that series to close them out and go to the 86 finals. Like, that's one of the feats that I don't think, and maybe it's because of everything that happened with the Rockets after that, they weren't able to sort of sustain that. But we don't give that run enough attention, the way that if a second year center went through the league and got through Nikola Jokic and went to the finals or whatever, there'll be billboards about this dude.
Right.
We don't give Hakeem that credit.
Never. And keep in mind, he only started playing basketball like 5 years before that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's even crazier. And when he's, going against Kareem and, then later Robert Parrish, he's not even at the peak of his powers yet. That's what I find so crazy about 86. It's this magical year, but the actual name Dream Shake hadn't even been coined yet. He's still like learning the basics of basketball. Like even all these years later in like 92 or something, when he becomes teammates with Kenny Smith, he's obviously incredibly dominant, but Kenny says, where would you like the ball? The elbow? And Hakeem is like, what's the elbow? And so it's like, this guy is still learning and he's that amazing. And so that's why I think these early feats against some of the best to ever do it are even more astounding, because that's just pure talent. That's just pure heart.
It's like you said, it's amazing that you're still learning and you're dominating. And the one last thing, there's two more things I want to hit on before we go into like present day NBA stuff, because this stuff is just so fascinating to me to dive deep into it. You guys have to get the book. Like, I'm serious. Like, she ain't paying me for this. Like, you got to get the book. Like, I was having trouble reading it on the plane because I'm like, I didn't want to take up space, so I bought it on Kindle. So I was just reading it on my phone last night because I was like, I was like, I don't feel like cutting my phone light on and disturbing the people next to me. And I was like,
it's difficult.
What? Yeah, it is difficult. Like, the light is there, but you don't want to use it because you don't want people to feel like they got a light in their face. And being a black man, a light in my face ain't always the most positive thing, because that brings across certain things. But because I've never written a book, this is just my own general curiosity. Mm-hmm. How much did Hakeem participate in this with you? Like, how do you approach someone about this?
Yeah, so first I spent months just like writing to him, like really thoughtful letters of like, hey, I truly think, your impact on today's game is not talked about. I think that there would not be a Giannis and Embiid without your example. I so admire your dedication to Islam. I really want to tell this story for the younger generation who may not be as familiar with your game. And slowly started to get to like his inner circle, and Hakeem was still like mulling it over, and he allowed me to come to the home of one of his friends, Henry Ibarrondo, who figures prominently in the book. He's like his former lawyer, financial advisor, things like that, but really just like a father figure. And so Hakeem said that was fine. I can talk with them. And so when I went to their house, I interviewed the father. There's a father and son, Henry Sr. And then they invited me back the next day, and I went, and Hakeem is in the house. And I was just like, oh my God, this is my moment, And Henry's son like has my Giannis book, and he's like, please talk with her. Like, this is her book. And Hakeem, I had went to his mosque like the day before. So he has his own mosque in Houston downtown. And Hakeem said it was okay that I went, and he connected me, like his director and I connected. And so I like meet Hakeem, and he's the nicest guy ever. And he just wants to ask me, did you go to the mosque? How did you like it? What did you think? And then the next day he gave me some numbers for people close to him. So he said he prefers to, not speak himself. Obviously he's so private and so deep, with his faith. He doesn't believe in anything that, causes attention or praise to himself. Like, humility is different in his book. He really lives by it. But I was so thankful that he was helpful and got me connected to others.
No, the interviews that you got from people. Like, I was wondering, like, did you actually go to Nigeria? Like, that's what it felt like.
That was their coaches are in their 80s now, and I just was like, how has nobody interviewed his coaches in Nigeria, his teammates? Like, honestly, that was some of the most fun reporting, Like, what was he really like? Could he have been a Hall of Fame handball player? I mean, maybe.
He was an athlete. Like, there was a point in the book where he asked his teammates, like, if you weren't playing basketball, like, could you play another sport? And that's what made him say, are you a basketball player or are you an athlete?
Are you an athlete? Right.
That man was an athlete. That man.
And still an amazing table tennis player to this day. Which doesn't shock me at all. No, I didn't, but I would lose so bad.
As would I. As would I. As would I. We'll be back with Mirin Fader. We got to pay some bills. There's one Hakeem story that I really want to get to her on, and we're going to talk about some intriguing storylines because, of course, the NBA is beginning up this week. You're listening to The Good Word here on Yahoo Sports. Welcome back to The Good Word. We're here with Mirin Fader. She has a book on Hakeem Olajuwon that you guys should go pick up. Like I should have mentioned earlier. Best-selling author. Like, I'm a writer. She's an author. There's a difference. Like, it's, as the kids say, it's levels to this shit, right? So there's this big passage. I don't say it's a big passage, but there's a passage. It may be a couple pages long, Mirin, where you're talking about the 84 draft. And, like, I guess the greatest compliment to Hakeem Olajuwon is that for everyone to talk about Sam Bowie as the number 2 pick in Portland, and Portland should have taken Michael Jordan and everything else, nobody says the Houston Rockets missed by not taking Michael Jordan, the greatest player of all time. But there were so many different machinations of proposed trades, like the Lakers dangling James Worthy out to try to get to the top of the draft, the Houston Rockets possibly having both Hakeem Olajuwon and Michael Jordan and getting them in the same draft, the possibility of the Bulls getting John Stockton and Michael Jordan in the same draft. Like, how fascinated were you by the history that could have been made rather than the history that was made?
Man, it was so fascinating because, to your point, I think it really speaks volumes that to this day, nobody is like, oh, the Rockets should have taken Jordan. Like, Hakeem will always be Houston, like a cult hero, a mythical figure almost, like beloved beyond. And I just love that to this day, that remains the case. Talking with the people that were intimately involved in the draft, like on the Bulls side, for a long time, they didn't know whether, they were going to get the first pick or not. Like, the coin flip, it was so different back then. And that's because after this draft, because they got Hakeem and Ralph Sampson back to back, 2 Twin Towers, number 1 picks, everyone's like, okay, the Rockets tanked. We can't let this happen again. But for the moment, the Bulls people are like, yeah, if we had the number 1 pick, we were picking Olajuwon. There's no question. Like, even after they picked Jordan, somebody in management told Rod Thorne, like the GM at the time, like, I hope this works out. Think about that. Like, Jordan wasn't Jordan. He was great. He had a relentless drive, but they didn't know he'd become that. And I think, I absolutely, I know you do too. I hate in sports media when, somebody blows up and they're like, oh, we actually wanted him. No, he was on our board. No, he was in the top. And it's like, he wasn't even your top 15. But truly, Olajuwon was everybody's number 1. And even though all those proposed trades and things that you were saying, was in the mix, like the Sixers were even somewhat involved. It definitely, from Houston's side, they're like, it's the plan all along to get 2 7-footers. Like, even though there had been similar players of, stature, not of 7'4" and near 7 feet with that type of mobility. That was just a creativity and agility, nimbleness, is that a word? That you've never seen before. And so I just think that is fascinating. Like, they were dead set on him.
I mean, I was thinking about this when I was reading it, because we all go and do these redrafts, or not redrafts, but if this draft happened today, like we do that thing with today's rules and today's game. I still think if you give a team the option, knowing what Hakeem Olajuwon turns out to be, knowing what Michael Jordan turns out to be, the greatest player of all time, you still might take the 7-footer or 7-foot-ish player first, even in today's game, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's weird because Olajuwon, so like, he wasn't developed offensively the way that he would become. So they were picking him based off of defensive prowess and potential. Like, Rudy Tomjanovich told me, he was like, look, we hoped he would pan out offensively, but it was a nice surprise that he developed so quickly. I think nowadays it's so hard because what does even being a center mean in 2024? Like, when I saw Zach Edey the other night, like doing a little jump hooks, I was like, I mean, I love him. Like, I profiled him. He's great. But like, it was weird to me. I just hadn't seen that type of thing in a while. So, I don't know. Like, could there be another near 7-footer with that type of agility and bring the center position back? Maybe. I don't know. It's interesting to see how the game has changed so much.
I think if you tell me that there's a player with the offensive talents, by and large, of Nikola Jokic, and the defensive prowess of Rudy Gobert and with better feet than Rudy, you're taking the 6'10" guy, right? Because I'm throwing the ball down to your big ass in the post, and the floor is spread, and you got shooters all around. Food, I tell you. Food, David Robinson. Food, Shaquille O'Neal. Food to every... Like, Mirin, I'm like a geek, right? And was just like happenstance. I'm a geek. There's this YouTube account, and I can't think of the name of it, but it pops up in my algorithm every now and again. And it pulled up the 95 Western Conference Finals. But it just did exactly the David Robinson versus Hakeem matchup. It was just a cut up of the entire series of those two going head to head. And that's an MVP, David Robinson, maybe the most athletic center we've ever had. And he dog walked that man. Embarrassed. I felt bad for him.
I literally, and the quotes, reading back the quotes from after, he looked like this helpless puppy that was just kind of like, I'm doing my best. Like, I don't know. Because that's the thing. Like, David Robinson was a prolific shot blocker, amazing defensive player. He had the height advantage, but Hakeem was like, not going to be denied. He's like, I have waited 10 years to get a championship. Like, I'm going through you. I'm literally going through you. So, I mean, when I watched it, as a writer, you know how hard it is. It's hard when the moves are simple. But when somebody does like 500 up fakes and, twisting this way and that, like how many times can you say spun, turned, put him in a blender, put him in a pretzel? Like the thesaurus was like not helping me out for the Hakeem book.
All the superlatives. No, all the superlatives. Like when I think of, and we don't get the mano-a-mano matchups anymore in today's game because dudes, y'all scared to get embarrassed. You don't want to take your matchup. You don't want to eat your 40, right? You don't see that. Like like we saw MJ and Clyde, right?
Right.
Sorry, Clyde, right? But Hakeem against David Robinson, like I can't even think of anything comparable in NBA history where player versus player, we're both around the same age or around the same experience. You know what I mean? Like Hakeem was a little bit older than David Robinson was, but David was in his prime. I can't think of a single matchup of comparable players where one guy completely destroyed somebody. And we don't talk about it enough. We don't.
I know, but think of the 80s era that Hakeem was raised on, right? This is the era of the bad boys. This is the era of there are two referees and you can punch people. Like this, he was so like built for battle that like nobody intimidated him. So I think by the time he gets to the, 94, 95, he's like, he knows he's him. Like he doesn't have to, there's just, I think with him, and this is what I tried to really convey in the book, there's a playfulness with him. Yes. There is that sense of playing pickup, like, oh, I'm going to embarrass you. This is fun for me. I think nowadays it's like, oh, we're nervous. How do we do? Da, da, da. Like for him, you felt like he was just in a pickup game, just having the time of his life.
Look, when he told, I can't remember what referee, maybe it was Ed Rush or someone else, when he was telling him at first, God will judge you for a bad call. And then he ran into the ref again and he was like, maybe God got some better things to do besides judging me for this call.
I had to interview the refs. Because one ref said he told me God will punish you. I'm thinking like, no, he didn't. And then I was like, no, I'm going to ask the other one. And he said the same thing. And I was like, oh my God, he really said this. And then there was already a meme on Twitter. And I was like, no, don't create a meme. It's going to be out of context. But yes, that the pre-return to Islam Hakeem definitely let the refs know how he felt.
He said, look, well, the one thing, and John just put it in here. I remember when Kevin Garnett had said on his podcast with Paul Pierce, I'm gonna hit him with lateral movements. he's like, and that's old Hakeem Olajuwon. That's pinstripe jersey Hakeem Olajuwon. That's not Hakeem with the goggles. You know what I mean? That's
so
older.
Good. It's so, okay, one of my favorite, you remember in the early chapters at the University of Houston, and he's like, he knows English, so it's not like he's learning English, but he's learning basketball terminology. Yes. And his teammates are like saying, I'm going to rock your world. And Hakeem like does something amazing. And he goes, now I'm going to rock your world. Like really proper, with the influence of British on Nigerian boarding school. And I was laughing so hard, just like picturing him saying that. And I'm like, wow, like he could destroy you in the most eloquent of ways. Eloquent.
I'm going to hit you with lateral movement. I'm gonna do that.
I'm gonna hit you with lateral movement.
I'm gonna hit you with lateral. I'm gonna do that once. I'm gonna say that about somebody once. It ain't gonna be playing ball because at this age, if I hit somebody with lateral movement, I'm gonna be lateraling my ass to the EMS. Right. But when we come back,
MCL tears here.
Both of them, ACL, MCL, ankle. We got to put your whole leg together, son. Lateral movement, dog. That's what we doing, lateral movement. When we come back with Mirin Fader, of course, Mirin does follow the NBA currently, so I'm going to give her a few of these intriguing storylines, and I'm going to see what she thinks about it. You're listening to The Good Word here on Yahoo Sports. Back here on The Good Word with Mirin Fader. Mirin, as of this recording, it is opening night. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm going to be seeing the Timberwolves and Lakers, which is intriguing for a bunch of reasons and not intriguing for one. Now, given all the intriguing storylines across the league, I'm going to give you the full plate. What intrigues you the most right now?
The most? Okay, well, this is biased because I have been chasing a Jalen Brunson profile forever.
Ooh.
I'm so intrigued by him. I think there is so much. I mean, as amazing as he is, this is a different level this season. I think he's going to continue to ascend in ways that we haven't even seen. It's just really cool to watch. You know, it's like when you're watching something amazing and a transformation happen in real time. I think that's what's happening for him, and I really want to see how he does, how they do. It's obviously with the moves they made, like. New York is going to be crazy. Like, I have to get to New York again.
Yeah, I think we all do. Like, I have a feeling that springtime in New York City during the postseason will be a fun time. And I think, Mirin, there's something refreshing and fun the first time a team not comes out of nowhere, but the first time they're playing with a little bit of expectations and you can rally around them before everybody starts picking everything apart. And I feel like the Knicks are kind of in that spot where they're not cute and cuddly. You know, they're not like the 14-15 Golden State Warriors in a way that, oh, we just think they're a nice, cute team that isn't going to win anything. And next thing you know, they won 4 championships out of the next decade. They're not that. But because the Knicks have not been relevant in ways that don't include New York for the past 20 years by and large, like this just feels like it's something different. Even if I don't know if it's going to work, mind you. I don't know if building around Jalen Brunson is going to work, but I think it's really fascinating.
Well, honestly, after reading Chris Herring's book, Blood in the Garden, which I read multiple times, it was so good. Everyone should definitely buy that. Quick plug. I guess I have way more of an appreciation for what New York is attempting to do, right? You're attempting to defy logic and expectation and just straight up pain for decades. And I think Jalen has something to prove. I do. I think it's going to be, you're going to watch the way he's written about change. You're going to watch this go from a playful, fun tone to like, okay, what are they doing? I think it's going to be interesting to see how media changes the way they write about him in New York.
Yeah, I think the Rick Brunson part of this makes this more fascinating, right? For a number of different reasons, right? It just adds more color and more texture, and people can figure out why. I'm very curious about the Anthony Edwards experience this season.
Right.
Mirin, am I wrong? How do I put this? I won't say I'm fearful.
I love your preambles.
Yeah, it's weird Mirin, because like everything with Ant is like showing up like roses, like the Netflix thing. I haven't gone through all the way through it. That was really fascinating. I feel like we are with Ant where we were with Ja Morant 3 years ago. And then we saw what happened with Ja Morant. Like we're waiting for the next guy to step forward and take the mantle from the LeBron, Steph, KD, you know what I mean, stranglehold that has had the league there for over the past decade or so. And I'm wondering, does Ant want that? Does he want all the attention that comes with it? Because it can be heavy. And I wonder, do I think that he would be great for it? Yeah, but you got to also want that. And I'm so fascinated by who wants it.
Right. I mean, he is somebody else that I wanted to profile. And so, this is purely based on my own, just what I've seen and read and all of that. And, not necessarily any conversation with him. But I do think he does. I just think he just reminds me of like just that competitive player who it could be the biggest game of their life and they're just in their backyard, having fun. He shrinks the moment. That's why I think he is ready for that. And that very few can do that and very few have that attribute. But again, it's like he is not the player he is today. He is not going to be that player in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So I want to see where the evolution goes, right? Like where does the work come in? Where does the growth happen? Because it can easily peter out and stall here, and especially with, what happened in the off season, like, I mean, that's got to change you as a leader. That's got to change you as a man. That's got to change you as a person. How is he going to respond to that? I think will be fascinating.
Look, Michael Jordan was 23 at the start of his first MVP campaign, I believe. No, he's 24. He's 24 at the start of the 87-88 season. And it's 23. I'm not making the LeBron, the Ant Jordan comparison because it's lazy. In some degree, he's like slightly, or his team is slightly ahead. So I'm very curious how you respond to the expectations. But before we go, one last thing with Mirin Fader, we're going to get into today's last word. Last night, the Denver Nuggets inked an extension with Aaron Gordon, 4 years, $133 million. They already inked an extension with Jamal Murray, a max extension a few weeks ago. That means this core is locked up for the next couple of years, and they've lost some players since winning the championship. They added Russell Westbrook, who's on the back end of his career. I'm fascinated by, does this team have another run left in the Mirin? If you've got the best player in the league and you've got the same bones of a team that won a championship, you should, but for whatever reason, I'm not completely confident.
Well, nobody's ever completely confident in Denver. I think that's the problem. Like they continue to surprise everyone. Oh my God, I've never seen anybody like Joker. I think we're taking it for granted how amazing he is. And I think when you have literally, in my opinion, the best player on the planet, like I think it is possible. I do. He's just that good. I do. And they would like us to not think they can do it because that's what they thrive in.
Yeah, I think the NBA rules kind of screwed them over a little bit, like trying to legislate parity and not being able to keep a team together. Like I'm not for legislating bad teams to be good without them having to be competent enough to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I can't believe I just used the term, a political term, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. But I know, right? But man, we talked about so much today. I want to give you the floor. Like, is there anything throughout this entire experience, this journey that you've been on, that surprised you, that intrigued you? Because you got a lot of people. Was there any anecdote that maybe we haven't brought up that really sort of caught you?
With the
and
book,
I'm putting you on the spot about something. I really apologize for
with
that.
The book, right? No, with Hakeem, right?
Yes.
Well, the one thing people think they know is that the origin story of how he comes to University of Houston, which is somehow he gets found by this coach who happens to be a white American coach who happens to be in Nigeria for some reason nobody knows. The next day, the coach is like, "You're amazing. Let's go to the embassy, get you a visa. You'll play in America. I've got you visits set up for St. John's, for this place, for that place, for that place." Boom, lands at JFK in New York. The myth goes Hakeem was so cold. It's New York. I can't play at St. John's. I got to go to University of Houston. What a great choice. Weather dictates the future. And then boom, they're Phi Slamma Jamma. Great story. There's so many holes in this story.
Yes.
It's not true. I called all the coaches. They're still alive. They're like, we never had any contact with this coach. We never recruited Olajuwon. He was never supposed to come to St. John's. For me, I just put my little capital J journalism hat on and was like, I'm just going to do some good old fashioned phone calls. And the myth that has been accepted for decades is so filled with falsehoods.
It's fascinating because I wanted to ask you, and that was one of the things I've written down, but the conversation kept going. I was like, what do you believe actually happened that got him to the University of Houston? What is your theory?
Okay. So this coach, Chris Pond, he did not work for the State Department like he told reporters. I did a FOIA request. I found that that's not true. However, I did speak with many people involved in various African teams at the time and State Department official who worked in Africa. And basically, while he didn't work for the State Department, it is possible throughout his stints coaching in Central African Republic and Liberia that he made connections. Back then it was a whole lot easier to just get a visa and come to the States than it is now. And so it's not improbable that he could help him get the necessary paperwork to get there. But the plan, in my view, with all the reporting I've done, was to come to University of Houston all along. It's not that Coach Guy V. Lewis at Houston was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to have you. In fact, he was like, okay, show up, we'll see what he can do. But it was definitely like an invitation, a tryout, versus that didn't exist for any of the other schools. I think this coach, who did make a very positive impact on a lot of people, I want to stress that. I really tried to put the nuance in the book. He embellished his standing as a recruiter. And I think maybe he wanted to show that he had all these connections, but really it wasn't real.
Look, y'all, I'm telling y'all, go buy the book. Because even like some of the anecdotes about Hakeem when he was punching dudes, because you know what I mean, like the temper and all that, like the way that he used to dress, and he was a fashion guy, and then he turned into kind of a minimalist. Like all of it is so fascinating because Mirin dug deep into it. And once again, y'all, she is literally one of my favorite people on the face of the earth. Mirin, I really, really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, I appreciate you so much, Vinny. Thank you.
Don't forget, go buy her book, Dream, The Life and Legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon. Thanks to producer John and the entire team who worked so hard behind the scenes on this show. Remember, we have a separate podcast feed for The Good Word with Goodwill. Go subscribe and give us a rating and review. I'll be back on Monday with another episode of The Good Word. And until then, everybody be safe.